Good morning. Welcome to our session.
Okay.
It's all about middle powers now. Please take your seat, Minister. So we are in a great transition toward a multipolar world. We've heard that along the conference. And the role of middle powers is really crucial. And this is what we will be talking about these countries that are powerful in their regions, that are really confident in diplomacy, and that are growing fast. And they are not just watching, they are rewriting the rules. And to discuss this, I'm joined by this great panel. Let me introduce you to the panel. I'm joined by the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Nigeria, Minister Tuggar. Thank you for being here. The Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs from Indonesia. Thank you so much for being here, Vice Minister. Leila, she's the CEO of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And Mr. Arts, he is a leading expert in Belgian and EU competition law, and he has been recognized as one of the world's leading competition lawyers. Now, let us start perhaps by asking, is there really a shift from a US-led world order towards a China-led order, or are we in a transition that is not clear yet, that could be perhaps even defined as a messy transition? Minister Tuggar.
There is a shift. It may not necessarily be about leadership from one major power to another or superpower to another, but rather to a multilateral system from what some have referred to as a unipolar moment. Some have said it never really quite existed. Well, depends. But the interesting thing is multilateralism appears to be in a very precarious situation. And this is why the medium powers, if you will, need to step up and ensure that they project the need for the continuance of multilateralism because it's in their national interests. In the case of Nigeria, what we are advocating for ourselves is strategic autonomy. That means we're not going to be aligned to any particular pole or superpower or the other, but rather we're going to deal with each based on our national interests, and it's not going to be based on ideology. We're not going to go along with bandwagoning. And we're friends to America the same way we're friends to China, to India, to Brazil, of course to Europe. We've had a long-standing relationship. So that is very critical, and it's important that we take that position because we ourselves are a regional power on our continent. And we do not want our continent to become the battleground for the leading powers. And that is why we're also taking a firm stance against the use of private military companies in any shape or form by anyone in our neighborhood. So it's important. There's a contest. You can see there's a renewed contest for critical minerals, for rare earths, and we're saying, well, come one, come all. But importantly, refine it, process it in Africa, as opposed to just taking out the raw materials. It even makes more sense to do the value addition on the African continent, and that way you provide employment, and that way you don't have to worry about irregular migration.
So a multipolar world where countries are still looking for national interests, that's where we're at now. Is that also the case in Indonesia?
Yes, absolutely, because I think in any geopolitical situation, countries need to look at their own national interest. Our foreign policy is based on what we call the independent and active foreign policy. It's a principle of foreign policy, pretty much the same with Nigeria, where we are looking for friends, not camps. We are looking for partners, not alliance. I think this is a very important key in understanding the current world today. That is why we are looking at the world as becoming more and more multilateral network or multiple networks. And this is why we are quite active in engaging with different parts of the world. And I can tell you that our president, in just 1 year of his office, he went already to 24 countries. And some countries he visited more than once. So actually, our president went to East Asia, America, Africa, South Asia. So it's a different part of the world that he visited, and he would like to underline that the importance of having a network of friends around the world. And you know what our colleague from Minister of Nigeria mentions on the partnerships on critical raw minerals, for instance. We have actually banned the export of raw materials a couple of years back, and we saw a tremendous amount of profit domestically. In the past, for instance, our nickel export was only $1 billion a year. After we processed domestically, our export went up to $20 billion in just 4 years' time. And I think this model can be used in different countries, especially in developing countries. And I think in the geopolitical context today, those who would like to work with many developing countries, I think should look at the importance of the economy, resilience of the developing countries everywhere they are. So yeah, it's not going to be geopolitics led by one power or two power. I think it could be more complex, and also geopolitics where the non-state actors, which is the big tech, still also have a big say in many geopolitical situations today.
Ms. Fourie, from your perspective as a CEO of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, how is this changing? How do countries work together now in this shift that we're experiencing, where nationalism and national interests are important, but at the same time, friends and partners internationally?
Caroline, I fully concur with both the Minister and Deputy Minister in that the centre of gravity is definitely shifting. We're shifting from what was previously a unipolar, dominated by one world power environment to a multipolar environment. We are seeing this in flows, we're seeing this in trade, and we're seeing this in the crafting of new multilateral relationships. We're seeing this on a number of levels. Firstly, there is a shift based on the basic macroeconomic fundamentals. Not only is debt to GDP much more appealing in the global south, but growth, there are new growth poles. Over the next 5 years, growth in the global south is likely to be around 4.2%. The expectation of the global north is less than 2%, 1.9%. So you can see that there is already the shift into a more growth-oriented environment. In addition to that, the demographic dividend of Africa is starting to gain prominence. The African continent will grow by 2035 its youth population by 450 million people. That is more than double the rest of the world put together. And so this brings with it the opportunity of labor, development of tech, consumption, etc. And then finally, we are starting to see the canaries down the mine, which are market flows, my business. We've seen a shift, a rotation out of the US, which has enjoyed a decade of attracting more than 80% of global flows, to a more diversified approach with emerging markets surging well ahead of the developed world counterparts. South Africa is also starting to be seen as a bridge. Our equity market is one of the top performing in the world year to date. We've delivered 50% increase in yields year to date, which is well ahead of the MSCI World and S&P World, which is in the high teens. Emerging markets generally are in around 28% up. And so when you put all of these factors together, the macroeconomic fundamentals, which are shifting towards a more healthy and balanced ecosystem in the developed world, together with a number of very important alliances that are starting to develop. The BRICS Plus coalition now contributes 45% of world GDP and 50% of the population. And if you compound the growth factor on those countries, you see a very different world in 10 to 15 years from now. So I'm very much more in the camp with Minister Yusuf that we are unlikely to see a diametric shift from one unipole to another, but rather a multipolar environment with resilience and multilateral relationships. And South Africa is very well poised and very well positioned in that global ecosystem. We're coming out of a difficult 10 years of low growth, and that has genuinely started to switch.
And this multipolar world, how does this translate from your perspective in laws? Is it making everything more complex or even easier? Is it more difficult now to have trade between countries, or?
Well, we are in a world of transition. That means that things are changing, things are becoming more complex, and that is, to some extent, a lawyer's paradise. Because the multinational undertakings that, for instance, a firm as us is serving, they have to deal with different types of laws in different parts of the world, changing laws. The minister referred to strategic autonomy. If you are a multinational that is active in a country that says, look, you are welcome to be active in our jurisdiction, but you have to apply with certain conditions, meaning that you have to process elements, you have to create some work within our jurisdiction. That creates some challenges for multinational undertakings to reorganize themselves, to adapt the way they are working, to adapt their supply chains. And in this world of change and complexity, I think indeed the level of complexity is increasing, and that creates a challenge for all those who are active in a multipolar world, combined or compared better to a world that existed 10, 15 years ago. And when I spoke to a couple of multinational clients in preparation of this conversation, I asked them, is it more difficult, is it more complex for you to do business in this world? And the answer was unequivocally yes. I had to change my whole supply chain. One multinational company said to me, I had, for one particular raw material, one place in the world where I source my full global demand of that particular product. I had to change that and diversify my sourcing of raw materials, meaning that you have to abide with an increased number of laws in countries which, rightfully so, insist on strategic autonomy in a world where we have seen that the globalization has maybe not served everyone as well as some others. So that is the challenge that companies face, and the legal complexity that goes with it is an important element to deal with.
How does this work then, legal complexity and multipolar different centers? How does this work in a global world, though? Isn't it a contradiction to that?
So, you see, there were certain practices that fed inequalities globally. And this approach, the change of approach that perhaps some of the multinationals are complaining about, is speaking to those very practices that were feeding inequalities. Case in point, transfer price system, where you would have a multinational company operating in a developing country, does not pay taxes there, and beats the taxes by, on paper, having a semblance of trading going on within the same organization. So one company A sells to company B, and supposedly, that exchange is happening between two separate entities, whereas in fact, they belong to one multinational grouping. This is one of the reasons why Nigeria is also championing the UN global framework on taxation. So to reform the tax system so that it is more equitable, so that we don't have a situation where the developing countries continue to be stagnated, continue to suffer from debt crisis, which some are even describing as a development crisis, and the fact that the terms of trade are never fair, the fact that if you go back to what has transpired in the past, where we had structural adjustment programs that the developing countries were compelled to adopt, that would relegate them to being exporters of raw materials and agricultural commodities instead of finished products. This is why Indonesia said, no, nickel, let's process it here. Whoever wants to buy, we're not going to be exporting the raw nickel. And this is what countries like Nigeria are also talking about. And it only makes sense because the prevailing conditions are such that the ingredients required for trade are all there in the developing countries. Nigeria has a population of 230 million. It's going to be 400 million in the year 2050. We're going to be the third largest country in the world. We have a youthful population, so we've got the workforce. A continent like Europe has an aging population, and so do a lot of northern hemispheric countries. So we've got the resources, we've got the youthful population and the workforce. Why not process it there, add value, and it would even be cheaper to process, to produce out of Africa, out of a lot of the developing countries. So it goes back to the fundamental debate between the Berg report that gave birth to the structural adjustment program and the arguments forwarded by the late, great Adebayo Adedeji, who was the head of the Economic Commission for Africa, that was saying, no, let us produce finished products also, because in terms of trade, there's more in it, because as societies move from lower income to middle income, the demand is for finished products. So there's more value in that, whereas you stagnate if all you're going to be doing is exporting crude oil and critical minerals, and that's the end.
It almost sounds like if you would describe the rules of the old world order as unfair, would the
20th century, that's passé.
middle powers,
21st century.
So the middle powers, the new rules, they would make the terms more fair for everyone, for the global south.
Works for everyone.
And Leila, you are a co-chair at the UN Global Investors for Sustainable Development. Is this also a discussion you're having? Is there also a transition happening towards fairer rules?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, I serve on the UN Global Compact Board, and many people would have heard the Secretary General Guterres saying that the financial infrastructure and the governance infrastructure was built off the back of the World War II, and it's no longer relevant. And so I think to build on the point that Minister Yusuf is making, there are fundamental shifts that we are seeing. So, as you rightly say, the developed world and the middle powers are holding agency. They hold the natural resources. So we've heard about Indonesia's nickel shift, which I think has contributed now to the growth where you're delivering more than 50, I think maybe even 59% of nickel to the world. Zimbabwe has done something similar with lithium. The DRC has introduced a quota system. South Africa holds the highest percentage of PGMs. These are critical minerals for the future growth of the AI and electric car and other technology developments. And so what we are seeing, as I said earlier, is agency finally starting to shift towards the middle powers. They have negotiating power. They're able to shift what was previously a hard-coded structure into a more developed environment. And what they're doing, in addition to negotiating resources, is creating new structures and micro coalitions. Whether we talk about MICTA, whether we talk about BASIC, which was Brazil, Africa, India and China in the climate negotiations, whether we talk about BRICS plus the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which, by the way, has grown intercontinental trade by 12.5%, more than double what it was in 2000. And so these formulations are starting to create blocks of power that make individual bilateral negotiation no longer, make those countries no longer as exposed to the individual bilateral negotiation. And they are finally giving agency and giving power to those countries who have the long-term and medium-term potential to grow the economy and have the keys for the future of technology.
But isn't that creating also regional segments at the same time? We're not talking about international trade, but really like bubbles that are trading by their own. Isn't that the case?
No, not really, because our experience, for instance, Indonesia, we are applying for OECD, but we're also working with BRICS countries. Within the BRICS, there are discussions on standards, on raw materials, on sustainable environment and sustainable productions, for instance. So we know that in the EU, for instance, they have their own standards that everybody has to fall in line in order for us to be able to sell to EU. But now we also want to see that in other groupings, we can also create a standard. This is one thing. Another thing that we are now working in Indonesia is that we have just had a critical raw minerals producing countries meeting in Jakarta. So it's an initial discussion of 18 countries. We want to learn from different countries, from Latin America, from Asia, and from Africa, attended by a colleague from the capital and also from the embassy in Jakarta. So we get the feel already, you know, that many of them, they wanted to learn of our own process. They want to learn how we can invite investors for processing in our own country, in Indonesia, for instance. We have now downstreaming from Canada, Korea, Japan, China, and Europe as well. One French company is now downstreaming in our nickel, for instance. So these are the new trend, I would say, that we should look after ourselves because we want to be part of the global supply chain, if you will. I understand multinational company has to think through in different way to find where are the locations of the raw materials in order to put them together. But we also want to invite them to come to Indonesia in different products. I'll give you an example, a very, very real example. We have one company from Turkey. They came to me, I think, a month ago, and they want to set up battery productions from nickel in Indonesia. And the battery that they are producing is used for general production and military use as well. So we see already the reality of cooperations, and it's very interesting that the Turkish battery system also linked to EU standard. So by having the investment in Indonesia, we can produce a battery in Indonesia with our resources, with a standard that fits with EU. And interestingly enough, some of the battery that is used for military purposes is NATO standard, because Turkey is NATO. So this is a new kind of situation we are developing. So it's a bilateral, for instance, us in Turkey, with a couple of countries in the critical raw mineral producing countries, for instance, or in the larger scale of BRICS, or in the larger scale of OECD. I think the lesson that we learn from tariff in the US, maybe you will ask this question, so I'll just put it on the table now.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Is that we cannot afford to be dependent on just one source. Okay, and even the US is only 15% of the global trade, so we have to work on the 85% of it. And in this context, we need to be creative. I'll give you an example, for instance, within ASEAN. Within ASEAN, we are now having a bilateral payment system using QR code. We've done it with Singapore, with Malaysia, with Thailand, but we haven't done it with ASEAN. So if we expand this at the ASEAN level, if we expand it with Japan, we are talking, with Korea, we are talking. So if we can do this bilaterally, say Indonesia and Nigeria. So if a Nigerian in doing business in Indonesia, you want to send money, you just send the QR code. You don't have to go to New York. So this is a new way of doing business. Technology helps a lot in this kind of exchanges that provides a new opportunity for us to leverage the global situation. It's uncertainty everywhere. So we have to find some really certain way of doing business, probably small, but it can be scale up or generate in a much larger scale. But we have to be creative. We have to look at different opportunity. For us, Indonesia, for instance, now we are looking at different markets. We work a lot with Nigerian ambassador in Jakarta. We have Indonesian company in Nigeria already. We want to expand. We are working with North Africa, with East Africa, with Latin America, with South Africa as well. We just had a big Indonesian exhibition in Latin America. This is our second session entering Latin American market. We are now started to have discussion on FTA with Mexico, for instance. So these are the things that we have to look at these days. We cannot be dependent on just one power or one sector. We have to look everywhere. Yeah.
And that's something that the United States is pushing everyone to do. Your country hosted the G20 summit a couple of years ago with great success. Where is the G20 now? Is it as important as it was a couple of years ago?
I think so, because there we can be in the room, we can listen whoever wants to say something. At least we can predict. Some policy are being made, some policy are not being made. It's still very interesting. And I think the G20 has another aspect, which is the bilaterals. A lot of deals, a lot of meeting, like in Davos style. You have a meeting in the sideline, a lot of discussion on the sideline. So it's still a very interesting setup, I think.
Mr. Arts, regarding this transition where we're in, this also creates a vacuum. The new rules are probably not written yet. Is this also creating gray areas in your field, in competition law, and how do you deal with that?
Oh, in the field of competition law, what we saw was over the last couple of years a proliferation of countries adopting rules to which all the companies had to abide with. And significant transactions sometimes had to be notified and approved by 10, 15, 20 jurisdictions. Now, what you could also observe is whether there was any jurisdiction that had a predominant role in approving transactions. And to what extent smaller countries where a transaction was notifiable, to what extent they had sufficient clout, notwithstanding the fact that it was a mandatory requirement to notify, whether a local authority would have the significant impact on the outcome of the transaction. Sometimes the smaller countries waited for the outcome of the vetting in a big country and then aligned with it, maybe because of the fear that the impact of not approving the transaction might have a negative impact of the presence of the emerging parties. Now, what you see these days, I think, is a creation, an embryonic creation of a cluster of countries that come together and say, let's put together a cloud, let's put together a wave, and let's create maybe a vetting system that is similar to what the European Union had done, where 720 member states have created their own system and require companies to notify to the European Commission, which might have the effect that the impact that the, between brackets, smaller countries may get in approving merger control, in improving transactions will significantly increase, and hence you will have to take into consideration more significantly the impact of these authorities reviewing these transactions in the future.
And I mean, you talked about a proliferation of rules. Do we see, because of that, also a proliferation of investigations?
Well, yes, because if you have a number of, you have increased number of authorities that require a transaction or a company or to be vetted, then you see an increase of investigations. But what you also see, and that goes back to what the minister referred to, the strategic autonomy, is the adoption of new sets of rules that try to secure the interest, the strategic interest that sectors, that activities may have, the foreign investment regulations, where alongside merger control, companies have to get the approval of the member states, of the states, that a transaction can go ahead from a security perspective. And for instance, in the European Union, you see that the FSR regulation, the foreign subsidies regulation, has been adopted, where in addition to the competition law rules, the Commission is also now requiring and examining to see whether companies that acquire a company in Europe are not being sponsored too much by state resources from third parties. So you see in that respect also a proliferation of rules, and I think it is a trend that is visible not only in Africa or in the Asian region, but also in Europe, to try to create a strategic autonomy and ensure that those who will invest in Europe are people that are welcomed and that we are playing on a level playing field.
I would like to take some questions from the young voices because we're running out of time, and there are a couple of questions that were sent to me. One is from Anshika Gabir. I'm not sure if she is in the room. Give me a sign. Oh, there you are, sorry. You have a question for our panel.
Hi, thank you so much for the session. It was very insightful. I'm Anshika, and I'm from Indian Institute of Management in India. And my question related to middle powers is, do you really see a risk of multilateral organizations such as BRICS meant to act as alternative channel for middle powers and instead being hijacked by China or US as a means to exert the influence? Thank you.
Do you want to pose that question to one of our panelists in concrete or to all of them?
I'm okay if anybody could answer.
No, I don't think so, because
no hijacking.
Yeah, because the decision-making process is, it's in such a way, and then I think you look at the different countries, members of the BRICS, they are quite almost the same size, not as with a different variety, but I think they're quite not going to be very easy to be hijacked by just one power. And I think the idea to have the BRICS is to create organizations or forum or discussions where we can find common interests that we can develop together over there. And they have the new banks, so maybe if they have some new payment system, for instance, this will be very interesting for us. The sort of financing as well is very important for us. Brazil, for instance, have a great idea on the tropical forest, for instance. So on the climate issue, for instance, it's a source of income for us, you know, quote unquote, because climate finance is the big problem today. I'll give you an example. Indonesia have done our homework on trying to identify how much fund do we need for our own climate mitigation and adaptation. The number is $285 billion just for Indonesia up to 2030. And our budget can only get 18% out of it. So the rest we have to find outside of our budget. So it would be bonds or sukuk or any other financing, multilateral. And you know, if there are new groupings that may be able to provide new financing for our climate change, why not? So I don't think this will be, in a way, hijacked by one power or another power.
Mm. Do you want to add something to that question, the hijacking of the new groups, like, for example, BRICS, or?
Yeah, well, in the case of Nigeria, we're trying to join G20 and BRICS, and we don't see any conflict in that, you know, because who are BRICS? The B, the R, the I, the C, the S, then G20, and then BRICS, and the plus, yeah. So we get invited to the summits and the meetings of both. We're participating actively. I think more attention needs to be paid to what is actually happening on ground and what entrepreneurs and the private sector is doing, the opportunities that they are pursuing, even with the laid down rules. Minister Arif mentioned climate finance. Nigeria is co-chair with Germany on the Green Guarantee Group, for instance. And what we're trying to do is find non-sovereign guarantees to fund climate change, because the moment you talk sovereign guarantees, the finance ministers in developing countries walk out of the room, or you will not see them again if they give you an appointment, because, you know, it's become a trap. They're scared of it. So let's find more creative ways of funding climate change. But I would like to also add that when it comes to regulation, I think there's more regulation in Europe, in the EU. We're all eagerly awaiting the implementation or the outcome of the Draghi report and the exercises that accrue from it. When we talk about CBAM, we talk about supply chain laws. Here in Germany, you have the Lieferkettengesetz and all these things. They constitute more of a challenge to businesses than what is happening in the developed world, where we're saying strategic autonomy, let us engage based on our interests. And at home, we're implementing so many reforms. Under the Tinubu administration, if you look at the macroeconomic reforms Nigeria has done, you know, stabilizing the exchange rate, business facilitation law, tax reform laws, overhaul of our petroleum sector laws, Electricity Act with feed-in tariffs. These are all things to attract business, to attract investment, and to tackle the issue of irregular migration by providing jobs, so that nobody has to be scared there's going to be a horde of Nigerians coming to invade Europe, you know, and you know the.
So how can Europe become more attractive for the middle powers then? Listening to what the minister just said.
Oh, I believe that the president of the European Commission is coming after us. Maybe that is the question to ask the president within a moment. But you're right. Europe is struggling to some extent with itself. in the sense that we have gone very far in adopting, some will say, pretty stringent and demanding legislation in a number of areas: climate change, supply assessment, AI, and also in the digital world. That might have, to some extent, reduced the innovative strength, the incentives to innovate, the entrepreneurial spirit of Europe. And Europe has to find probably a balance between adopting regulations which I think the European authorities and in instances are convinced that are necessary given the challenges that are there on a global scale, climate change and others, with maintaining that the entrepreneurial and innovative spirit in Europe and getting the balance right. And I think what you refer to, Minister, is a kind of a regulatory competition that may occur in the future between the different blocks, the Asian blocks, the African bloc, the European bloc, to be sufficiently attractive for business. And that comes with a challenge in trying to indeed be sufficiently attractive to businesses, but at the same time also meet all the challenges that are appearing on a global scale, just to mention global warming. And that is, I think, a challenge that we all have to face. And that might be maybe the reason to create or to recreate a multilateral world, maybe not the one that existed, but a strengthening of the ties that ensures prosperity everywhere, but at the same time also allows us to meet the challenges that we all have to face together.
It's interesting how you say we do want to be friends with the G20 and in the BRICS as well, and you, Minister, also mentioned that. But we're not talking only about trade. There are very strong political interests as well, and trade is weaponized also. We also see that with the tariffs in a political world. So how do you navigate that fine line between different powers, the old powers, the newer powers? How do you do that?
How? We leverage. I think we maintain being friendships with different big powers, okay? But we also leverage each of them with different interests of Indonesia, for instance. With EU, for instance, we just finished the SEPA, okay? It's a long-standing agreement. We finally finished it. We hope to be able to ratify that soon, so we can maximize that. With the US, yes, the US has some tariff against us, but we can leverage some of our requirement as well. We have problem with our oil lifting. Our lifting is only 800,000 barrels a day. We require 1 million barrel per day, so we require more oil and gas. So we invest in the US. We invest in Texas, we invest in Alaska. We work with Nigeria for oil and gas, for instance. We have a lot of consumptions of noodles. So it means we need more wheat. So let's buy wheat from the red states, for instance. So, you know, we leverage all these different elements of relation between the US. With China, the same thing, okay, with different partners. So that's why we are looking at different partner for different purposes as well. So it's
why is it that why should it be a situation where the US and China can trade with each other, but we're being told that we have to choose to deal with one or the other? Why? It's not a Manichaean thing where, you know, you have to, you know, it's not an either or, you know. That dual approach, you know, does not work in the real world. You know, you need, just as Arif is describing, you need one thing from one country, you need another from a different country.
But what happens if there are national interests on a different level? If there's a war, if there's a conflict, and then you have to choose?
Well, then you make the choice based on your national interest, and that's why we're sovereign entities. We have the right to choose, but not to be, you know, forced into one direction or the other. You know, so it's this Manichaean approach to international politics doesn't work. It's never worked. It doesn't have to be a win-lose. It can be a win-win for everyone.
Actually, I want to add on that.
Sure.
On our region, just pretty quick. There is a treaty between ASEAN and China, and there is another treaty between ASEAN and the US. It's called the TAC, Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. Under this treaty, the United States has legal obligations to exercise peaceful activities, not to pose threats to ASEAN countries. Same thing with China. China has a legal obligations vis-à-vis ASEAN and its member states not to pose any threat or to attack any of us. So the question is the other way around, whether or not US and China still believe their legal obligation to be peaceful to us in the region. It's not that we choose, but they have to tell us, right? You still abide by the law that you signed yourself. So that, I think, is the key issue. And when there is a conflict, of course, there is a decision, either you can create a neutrality or whatnot, but there's another issue. But I want to put some more complication to this
Even
discussion.
more, yeah.
UN Convention Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. You remember when one particular country said they're going to close Hormuz Strait, and the price of insurance went up, and the price of the vessels rented also went up. And this is a test that UNCLOS was never tested in times of war. And for Indonesia, for Nigeria, for instance, you have a long coast, you have a big coast over there. We have a long coast in Indonesia as well. So we really don't know, to be frank, what is the rule of engagement when the big powers are at conflict at sea today with the existing convention law of the sea. So we have been having a lot of discussion. We still don't know the answer, but maybe this could inspire many colleagues around the table that you have to look at. It
sounds like uncertainty indeed.
UNCLOS in times of war.
You wanted to add something to that?
Yes, maybe to add to that, and I do think that there are multiple points of vulnerability and risk, but those are equally so points of opportunity.
Exactly.
The Red Sea chaos in terms of supply chains creates an enormous opportunity for South Africa as a key deepwater port to create a supply chain solution. And I think what we are seeing is that developing and middle world countries are starting to take an agenda-setting role much more powerfully than we've seen between the two sort of dominant powers. Think about Turkey's Black Sea grain initiative. Think about the Brazil's sustainable fuels. There are not only in the supply chain environment, but also in overall contribution to economic development. The financial geography is also starting to shift, where we're seeing a decline in the investment in federal bonds and a structural shift away from traditional forms of investment in the Fed bond as a haven of safety into gold and building up other supplies. And so even in the developing world, we're seeing a fundamental shift with the Gulf and Southeast Asia playing a much more important role in flows. The Gulf has recently deployed $82 billion into emerging markets, and we can see that rotation out of the traditional US-based counters into emerging markets. We've seen the new development bank, the AIIB, who are now capitalized by $100 billion, which will start to generate a much more diversified and yield-seeking environment that becomes slightly less vulnerable to the volatility created by the immediate geopolitical positioning. And so I think overall, the middle world and the developing environment has much more agency and What is really important for that is that they have credibility in their home environment, transparent environments, appropriate institutions, appropriate rule of law. And if we look at where the current conflict is really rising in the European context, the developed worlds are looking like safe havens by comparison, and we have a lot to offer. Natural resources, basic rule of law, growth opportunities, a youthful population, all of these elements are critical for the development of the future of the developed world.
That's a really positive note to unfortunately end the panel, because I can see we're running out of time. Or do we have time for one more question? Okay, perhaps if Anshika Gambhir, no, sorry, Chloe Zeng is here from the Young Voices. Oh, right there.
Hi, hello. Also from Young Voice.
You also have a question, right?
Yeah, okay. I'm from Young Voice and from Fudan University from China. So yeah, I would like to ask a question from company side. So for those companies who want to explore in developing countries, for middle power market, and companies have to balance open R&D innovation with pressure from localization, made in local, so and tax security. What do you think about this balancing challenge?
Do you address your question to a specific panelist, or?
Oh, it's okay.
Company.
So,
Well, I think we already touched upon the issue previously in this conversation. That is, as a company, you probably your aim is to generate a profit. So you want to be able to dispose of the money that you generate in the country where you're active, and to spend it at your wish, compared with also the interest of the country in which you are active, that wants to see a benefit of your activities that will go to the country concerned. So it will remain, I think, a continuous challenge to balance if I can call it, the risk of investing in a particular jurisdiction, in a particular region, with the opportunity, with the rule of law that is always there, and that is a comforting idea, being a lawyer, that whatever you do, the rule of law pops up one day or the other, that in the end, you can also benefit from the activity for which you invested in. And that is a challenge that both governments and companies will have to meet in finding a balanced approach there.
If I may add, I think something that companies and multinational companies grapple with is arbitrage across regions. This is arbitrage around cost of capital related to regulatory capital implications, arbitrage around regulation related to privacy, related to AI, related to development of new technologies and how those are accepted or not in different jurisdictions, arbitrage around climate regulation, and I think we're starting to see a regionalization of those. And these shifts in the structural systemic ecosystem in which companies are trying to thrive and grow and develop their global footprint is shifting, and that creates as much of a threat as it does an opportunity. And those companies that will survive in the future are those that remain neutral, and those that create multilateral relationships and build the strength in their home country, build credibility in their home country, and create paths and redraw the trade corridors to those countries that are openly willing to engage with new sources of innovation, development, and growth.
again, the threat that is being seen as an opportunity. I love this as a conclusion of our panel. Thank you so much for this. To all of my panelists, the President of the European Commission will be here at 11 a.m., but we have to leave the room, please, because everything will be rescheduled. Thank you so much to the ministers, to Ms. Fourie, to Mr. Arts for this interesting discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.